Hello, are you okay? I hope so. I come to make this quick video to publicly express my suggestions to the end-user manifesto created by the Explaining Computers channel. I'm a subscriber to the channel. I think the content is very positive, but I've been using Linux for over 10 years. I've helped people with manuals, translations, code, on forums, and in real life. Then I would definitely not put myself as a gatekeeper in any way. I have certainly helped several people migrate to Linux and still continue to do so. Recently, I have noticed a certain movement aimed at increasing the adoption of Linux and at the same time trying to dissociate Linux from its roots in FLOSS and its collaborative development. I truly believe this is not only meaningless but also harmful to Linux as a whole. In short, to deal with it in technical terms, if we were to ignore the entire ecosystem and development and just use Linux as a technology, Android is certainly a much more compatible proposal for the end user today, especially since this user is already using it. For the end user, it is much more palatable and simple. I honestly don't believe there is anything holding back the adoption. I just believe that Linux is slowly growing in its own time and for its own audience. Adoption in itself is not something positive for either developers or users. An indiscriminate adoption of the system, as a mere alternative to what is there, will not generate anything if not more undue complaints and expectations. But let's analyze each of the points in this manifesto separately. On being an advocate and not a gatekeeper. In a way, we all advocate using Linux, to a greater or lesser extent. But we also understand that Linux is not Windows or Mac OS, and treating it the same way will not only get in the way, further its development, but it will destroy the positive points for those who already use it and, more importantly, those who made Linux get to where it is. Linux must be palatable to the end user, but not palatable like Windows or Mac, palatable in its own way and respecting its existing users and existing culture, and can improve for users' future but without detriment to the current scenario and for current users. We should not treat current users and their way of using computers as obstacles to the adoption of Linux. The truth is that Linux only got where it is because of these people and they deserve respect for their contribution. Sooner or later we will realize that Linux truly isn't for everyone, just as Windows isn't either, and it not only doesn't need to be, but I truly believe it shouldn't be. You don't need anything more than seeing a manual page to understand that Linux's development base makes it a different system, not better or worse, just different. So once again I need to say, I'm not against the adoption of Linux, but the adoption alone, disregarding the quality for current users and the current scenario, will be absolutely negative for Linux. On being tolerant, there is a problem with this way of thinking, and this problem is that all of us celebrating and dancing kumbaya together will be the holy grail. Different environments have different precepts and they don't match, are like oil and water. GNOME is an opinionated environment, KDE is more focused on customization and a traditional desktop. What makes you love GNOME tends to be exactly the same thing that makes KDE intolerable, and I truly believe that this is okay. We shouldn't force the user to be tolerable with something that doesn't serve them. Quite the contrary, I believe that the more distinct the development of the GNOME and KDE will be the better for both. Except that many people cannot currently use Linux, what I have to say about this is that, if you want to use it today, you will be able to, even if it is not ideal for your case. The problem is when people treat Linux as if it is the only one who has limitations. In fact, all operating systems have their limitations. If you don't want it, don't use it, but don't say that this is a Linux problem either. You said it yourself in your video. Anything you can do on a computer, there is a way to do it in Linux. It's okay not to use Linux, but it's not okay to attack Linux because you can't use it. In a way, I even think it's important that you can't do everything the same way. The day that Linux is a one-to-one alternative to Windows, that won't be Linux's victory, but rather its downfall. About spreading the word about how Linux has improved, I can accept this one 100%. About separate FLOSS crusade from the use of Linux, this I am 100% against. Linux was born and maintained in FLOSS culture, by FLOSS advocates, and they should be respected. Actually, it is realistic. Just look at FreeBSD and OpenBSD, both great Linux alternatives, and they all work flawlessly. 100% free, both as in free beer and freedom. Let me be very clear about this one. Without the collaborative development, Linux will die. It won't be the fist big project to ignore its base and degrade, and to be quite direct, if you are going to ignore the development and cultural foundations of Linux, why use Linux in the first place? Why not advocate using Android or Hackintosh? And I honestly think you are mistaken. Nowadays, the overwhelming majority of software is open source, just a light layer of applications that are proprietary and drivers/firmware that are proprietary, and it is very easy to verify this by the volume of packages necessary for the operation of a system and its respective licenses. The overwhelming majority are FLOSS. And it's better that way. There really are no problems using proprietary software on Linux. I endorse the adoption of Steam, but what Steam does for Linux is collaborative and positive, and not just about being proprietary software. About campaigning for Linux versions of major applications, I can accept this one 100%, although I don't think this type of attitude will change much. I think supporting companies that do good for Linux is way better. About give back where you can, I can accept this one 100%. I didn't come here just to attack, so here I propose a new version of the manifest that I see will fix all of these problems. Be an advocate for Linux and its development culture, not a gatekeeper. Know the possible choices and don't attack people who use Linux differently. It's a subtle difference, but very important, except that some people prefer not to migrate, some don't need to migrate, and some just can't migrate to Linux at all. Spread the word about how Linux has improved over the years. Understand Linux as FLOSS technology, but accept that not everything needs to be FLOSS in Linux. Again, it's a subtle difference but very important. Invest in companies that collaborate with Linux and FLOSS. Be aware of ways you can contribute and give back where you can. As you can see, I did my best to stay as close as possible to what you advocate, but without sublimating any of the points I mentioned above. What do you think of that? Maybe a new video with a version 2.5 manifesto? Well, that's what I have to say. A Merry Christmas to all of you and a Happy New Year.